It started with a phone call that Sarah Ferguson will never forget. One she wasn't expecting. One that ended a career she had spent years rebuilding from the ashes of royal disgrace. A soft, measured voice on the other end of the line, calm yet clinical, uttered the words that made her stomach turn cold. "Sarah, ITV will no longer be requiring your services." Just like that. No warning. No last hurrah. No chance to explain. For a woman who had clawed her way back into public favor, who had once been hailed as the savior of ITV's daytime lineup, it felt like the ground beneath her had given way. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. How does a woman go from being a royal embarrassment to a daytime darling, and back again to the headlines of shame? How does redemption unravel so quickly, so completely, that even the network that once celebrated her warmth and candor suddenly wants nothing to do with her? It happened in silence, not with headlines or flashing cameras, but with a quiet click, the end of a call that would change everything. Sarah Ferguson sat there, phone still in her hand, eyes unfocused. A lifetime of royal resilience suddenly meant nothing, because this wasn't just another scandal. This was exile, from the one place she thought she had finally found redemption. Have you ever had the rug pulled out from under you without warning? One moment, you're building everything back up, and the next, gone. That's what it felt like for Sarah that morning. No fireworks, no argument, no chance to fight back. Just a polite sentence delivered with corporate calm. ITV has decided to part ways. But what really happened in that moment? Why did a network that once celebrated her charm and would suddenly treat her like poison? It started with an email marked urgent. The night before the call, ITV executives had gathered in a sleek conference room overlooking London's skyline. Coffee cups lined the table. No one dared speak at first. The subject line on the printed document before them said it all. Reputational risk review, Sarah Ferguson. The words were cold, clinical, the kind that reduce human beings to liabilities. And in that meeting, the mood was just as cold. One producer, a woman who'd worked closely with Sarah for years, reportedly defended her. "She's good for the audience," she said. "People trust her. They relate to her." But another voice, a younger executive from the PR division, cut in sharply. "Trust doesn't matter if it threatens our sponsors. Look at what's happening online. We can't have her on the air while this Epstein story resurfaces." The room went still. Everyone knew what that meant. One name, Epstein, could undo months of progress, no matter how distant or indirect the connection. It didn't matter that Sarah hadn't been accused of any crime. In today's media, guilt by association was enough. By the time dawn broke, the decision had been made. One phone call, one script for the HR representative. And just like that, Sarah Ferguson's ITV chapter was over. When her assistant handed her the phone that morning, Sarah already sensed it wasn't good news. She'd felt it for weeks. The way meetings had become shorter, friendlier voices suddenly formal. The polite distance that creeps in when people know something you don't. Still, she wasn't ready for the finality in the voice on the line. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," it said. "We've decided to move in a different direction." Different direction. The phrase echoed in her head long after the call ended. That's how it always happens. Clean, sanitized words to mask a messy truth. Her assistant watched her quietly. The Duchess didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat there, staring out the window, lips pressed tight, as if holding back everything she wanted to say. In her mind, flashes of her ITV moments played like scenes from a film. Her laughter with guests. Her heartfelt discussions about family, motherhood, charity. All gone in an instant. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a business decision. It was personal, because behind that polished PR statement, something else was happening. Someone had been whispering. Over the previous weeks, emails had begun circulating in ITV's internal chat. Anonymous tips about potential reputational concerns tied to Sarah's past dealings. Some referenced her old debts that Epstein had allegedly helped settle years ago. Others questioned her continued association with Prince Andrew, despite his disastrous BBC interview. At first, ITV brushed it off. But then came a flurry of online chatter, coordinated, almost too organized to be random. Tweets, Reddit posts, obscure blogs all resurfacing the same decade-old story. Sarah Ferguson accepted money from Epstein. The timing was suspicious. The consistency was eerie. Someone wanted that narrative back in circulation. And it worked. By the time ITV's executives noticed, hashtags were trending. Sponsors began asking quiet questions. Suddenly, risk became a word that dominated every internal memo. Sarah knew none of this when the call came through. All she knew was that something she'd spent years rebuilding was collapsing, and she didn't understand why. In the hours after, she tried to reach her ITV contact, the producer who'd championed her comeback. No response. She tried another, straight to voicemail. Then another. The silence was deafening. That night, alone in her study, she poured herself a drink and stared at the phone. For years, she'd learned to handle media storms. She'd been ridiculed for her weight, her finances, her past affairs. She'd been mocked for her optimism, even her laughter. But this felt different. This was surgical, precise, almost coordinated. And she couldn't shake one haunting question. Who would benefit from her downfall? Was it just ITV trying to protect itself? Or was someone pulling strings behind the scenes? Some insiders believe the decision wasn't spontaneous at all, that it was months in the making. A quiet strategy by ITV to distance itself from any royal controversy, especially as public trust in the monarchy continued to decline. With Meghan Markle's interviews stirring old wounds and Prince Andrew's name back in court documents, ITV couldn't afford another royal-related PR risk. One journalist put it bluntly, Fergie became the collateral damage of the network's royal fatigue. They needed a clean break, and she was the easiest target. But there's a twist. In the days after the announcement, a confidential email leaked to a media blogger hinted at a deeper betrayal. The sender? An anonymous industry insider, claiming that someone close to Sarah had been feeding ITV unflattering details for weeks. It suggested that Fergie's own aide, a longtime confidant, had quietly turned on her, hoping to secure her own job by aligning with ITV's PR interests. If true, that betrayal would cut deeper than the network's rejection. But at that moment, Sarah didn't know about the leak. All she had was confusion and fear. Imagine it, the Duchess pacing her room, rereading old messages, trying to find clues in casual texts from producers. She'd always believed loyalty mattered in show business. That people would stand by you if you'd earned their trust. But loyalty, as she was learning, only lasts until the next scandal. As evening fell, a journalist called her phone, a number she hadn't shared publicly. "Sarah," the voice said, "I know you've been dropped. Do you want to comment on the Epstein connection?" She froze. How did they already know? The call from ITV had come only hours earlier. Yet somehow, the press was already framing the story. It confirmed her worst fear. This wasn't an accident. Someone had planned the timing. The call, the leak, the story release. All synchronized like a PR ambush. She hung up without answering. Her hands shook. The same network that once praised her resilience was now feeding the same press machine that had destroyed her before. But in the media world, silence is deadly. When you don't tell your side of the story, others will tell it for you, and rarely with kindness. By the next morning, tabloids screamed with headlines. Sarah axed amid Epstein scandal resurgence. ITV cuts ties with Duchess over PR fears. Fergie fallout. Charities distanced themselves. Each line hit her like a blow. And beneath those words, the same cruel subtext. She was guilty by proximity, tainted by association, disposable. Yet, amid the noise, there was one thing missing: Sarah's voice. She wanted to respond. Her PR team drafted a statement, but every word sounded defensive. Every sentence made her look more cornered. In the end, they advised silence, at least for now. But silence wasn't her nature. Sarah had always been outspoken, emotional, impulsive. That was part of her charm and her curse. To stay silent felt like surrender. Still, she bit her tongue. For the first time in decades, the Duchess, who'd always had something to say, said nothing. But inside, she was raging. Because deep down, she suspected something no one else dared to say. This wasn't about Epstein at all. This was about power. Someone wanted her gone, and they'd found the perfect excuse. That night, she confided in a friend over dinner. "It feels orchestrated," she whispered. "As if someone set this up." The friend hesitated before answering. "Maybe you should look closer at who's around you," they said. That line stuck with her. In the days that followed, Sarah began noticing small inconsistencies, a conversation her aide. Those questions echo not just in media boardrooms, But in the mind of Sarah Ferguson herself, the Duchess of York, who was once adored for her honesty, her humor, and her refusal to be silenced. But this time, honesty wasn't enough to save her. Not when the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein still looms over the royal world like a ghost that refuses to rest. Because this isn't just a story about a job lost or a show canceled. It's about trust, power, and reputation, the three currencies of royal survival. And right now, Fergie has run out of all three. Imagine the scene. A bright, sunny morning in Windsor. The phone rings, the same cheerful ringtone she's had for years. Her assistant answers first, then passes it to her, face pale, eyes wide. Sarah listens, her expression tightening as the words hit her one by one. Her lips part slightly, as if to protest, but she doesn't. She just listens. When the call ends, she stares out the window for a long time. Birds chirp outside, oblivious to the quiet storm inside that house. The irony is almost cinematic. For years, ITV championed her comeback story, the divorced duchess who refused to disappear, who rebranded herself as a relatable, resilient woman with a story to tell. Viewers loved her humor, her candor, her willingness to laugh at her mistakes. She wasn't polished like Kate, nor rebellious like Meghan. She was real, flawed, human, and that made her television gold. Until now. Because in the brutal world of television, reputations can turn faster than ratings. And when a name like Jeffrey Epstein reappears in the headlines, no network wants to be caught in the fallout. But let's rewind for a moment. Before the call, before the panic, before the scandal reemerged like a wave that no one could stop, Sarah Ferguson was on top of her game. She had multiple ITV appearances lined up, her children's book series was being praised, and there were whispers of a new primetime special celebrating her charity work. She'd come a long way from the days of toe-sucking headlines and tabloid mockery. Or so she thought. The trouble started quietly, almost invisibly. It began not with Sarah herself, but with her ex-husband, Prince Andrew. The man she never stopped loving, never truly left. The man whose name had become synonymous with disgrace. For years, she had defended him in public, even when others ran for cover. She called him kind, misunderstood, loyal. She told interviewers that the man she knew could never be the monster painted in the press. Those words might have come from a place of love, but in the world of corporate image management, they sounded like poison. And now, ITV couldn't risk the association. Someone inside the company, perhaps in PR, perhaps higher up, allegedly raised the alarm after one of Fergie's past comments resurfaced online. An old interview, a simple quote of support for Prince Andrew, began circulating again. The timing couldn't have been worse. New details were emerging in a U.S. investigation into Epstein's network, and suddenly, ITV found itself facing uncomfortable questions. How could a network that prides itself on integrity continue giving a platform to the ex-wife of the man at the center of it all? The dominoes fell quickly. Charity sponsors quietly withdrew support. Invitations stopped coming. Even her literary agents reportedly began expressing concerns about optics. Within a week, the warmth that had surrounded her career vanished. In its place came silence, the kind that feels heavy, deliberate, final. Still, Sarah tried to remain hopeful. She'd been through storms before: divorce, debt, ridicule, scandal. She knew how to survive. But this one felt different. This wasn't about a bad photo or a tabloid rumor. This was about guilt by association, about being tied to something too toxic for modern television to touch. Inside ITV's headquarters, the decision wasn't made lightly. Sources close to the production floor described tense meetings and divided opinions. Some executives argued that Sarah had rebuilt enough goodwill to weather the storm. Others feared that keeping her would invite boycotts and headlines questioning ITV's ethics. In the end, the risk outweighed the reward. One insider allegedly said, "The network can't be seen to stand by someone whose name appears in the same sentence as Epstein, even if she did nothing wrong." It was a brutal but simple equation. In media math, reputation is currency. And Sarah's balance had run dry. She found out on a Wednesday. By Friday, her team had cleared her upcoming schedule. Her assistant, who had once juggled 3 phones and dozens of emails a day, now sat idle. Calls went unanswered. The media, ever hungry for irony, pounced. Fergie axed, the headlines screamed. ITV dumps Duchess over scandal links. And just like that, The woman once described as TV's most unexpected comeback queen became its latest cautionary tale. But here's where things get murkier. Because according to whispers within ITV's own ranks, this wasn't purely about Epstein or Andrew. There was another layer, something deeper, something personal. Someone inside had allegedly pushed for her removal with surprising intensity. The question is, why? What did Sarah Ferguson do to make enemies in a place she thought was her second home? In the days that followed, she reportedly became reclusive. Friends said she was devastated. Others said defiant. She'd been here before. Public shame, career ruin. But this time, there was no clear path back. The world had changed. Redemption stories no longer guaranteed ratings. They risked backlash. Viewers wanted heroes or villains, not messy human contradictions. And Sarah, for all her charm, was the embodiment of messy contradictions. She wasn't royal enough to be protected, nor ordinary enough to be forgiven. She existed in that strange no-man's land between scandal and sympathy. And when the Epstein headlines resurfaced, ITV didn't hesitate to choose survival over loyalty. But what made the decision sting even more was how abruptly it happened. No warning, no meeting, no second chances. One phone call, one cancellation, and decades of relationship gone. It wasn't just a business move, it was a public severing of ties. For Sarah, the fear wasn't just about losing airtime. It was about losing credibility. Without ITV, she had no media anchor. Without her shows, she had no platform to promote her books, her charities, or her image. And in the modern media ecosystem, visibility is everything. Once you disappear from the screen, the world forgets you. Her closest allies tried to reassure her. "It'll blow over," they said. "You've bounced back before." But this time, even they sounded unsure. Because unlike her previous scandals, this one wasn't driven by tabloid gossip. It was driven by corporate fear. Fear of guilt by association. Fear of public backlash. Fear of the social media wildfire that can destroy reputations overnight. And that's when something unexpected happened. Within days of ITV's decision, anonymous messages began circulating among media insiders. Rumors of a leaked recording, a meeting where ITV executives allegedly discussed Fergie's future. Voices on the tape, calm and calculating, mentioning royal optics and public mood. The authenticity of the recording remains uncertain, but its existence alone was enough to reignite speculation. Who leaked it? Why now? And was this all part of a larger plan to erase Sarah Ferguson from the screen, or something more sinister? What makes this story so haunting isn't just the fall itself, but what it represents. The fragility of reputation in an age of moral performance. The way corporations and audiences alike demand redemption until it threatens their own comfort. Sarah Ferguson's journey from Duchess to talk show host to outcast is more than a celebrity scandal. It's a mirror, a reflection of how easily a public figure can be elevated, celebrated, and then obliterated by the same system that built them. And yet, through it all, one question lingers. Did she know this was coming? Did she sense the tide turning before the phone rang? Or did the betrayal hit her like lightning on a clear day? Some say she had warning signs, whispered cautions from friends in the media, subtle changes in tone from ITV producers, a canceled lunch here, a rescheduled shoot there. But denial can be a powerful shield. When you've been publicly humiliated before, you learn to ignore small tremors until the earthquake hits. As the cameras stopped rolling and doors quietly closed, Sarah's world began to shrink. She reportedly spends her mornings scrolling through old messages from her television team, rereading kind words from fans, trying to find reassurance that this isn't the end. But deep down, she knows, the media rarely forgives twice. Still, there's something unresolved here. Something that doesn't fit the clean narrative of scandal equals consequence. Because as more insiders begin to talk, a darker story is emerging. One involving secret communications, hidden agendas, and a betrayal that may not have come from ITV at all. And if what's being whispered behind closed doors is true, then Sarah Ferguson's downfall wasn't just professional. It was personal. Someone close to her may have played a devastating role in her undoing. But who? And why? That's where the story takes a shocking turn. One that no one, not even Sarah herself, saw coming. Because just as she began to pick up the pieces, another secret was about to surface. one buried deep within her own circle. And when that secret came out, it didn't just explain why ITV turned on her. It changed everything. The real question isn't whether ITV axed Sarah Ferguson. It's who wanted it to happen and what they stood to gain from it. But that revelation is only the beginning. Because behind the polished statements and PR-controlled silence lies a world of deceit, fear, and betrayal. And the person who started the fire that burned Sarah's career to ashes? She may have known them better than anyone. What happened next would blow the story wide open, and no one, not even the palace, was ready for it. It's strange how a ghost from the past can destroy your present, especially when that ghost wears the name Jeffrey Epstein. Sarah Ferguson thought she'd buried that chapter years ago. She had apologized, clarified, distanced herself, done everything she could to separate her image from the darkness that surrounded her ex-husband's scandal. But you can't erase what's written on the internet, or in the minds of those who want to believe the worst. The Epstein connection. It was the phrase that made her blood run cold. So let's go back, because to understand why ITV turned on her so fast, we have to dig into the moment that connection was born and why it never truly died. It started innocently, or so she believed. Back in 2010, Sarah was drowning in debt. Millions owed, creditors circling, her reputation in tatters. Prince Andrew, her ex-husband but still her closest ally, was her lifeline. And through him came a financial solution, a short-term loan arranged through one of his acquaintances. That acquaintance was Jeffrey Epstein. At the time, Sarah didn't ask too many questions. She was desperate, and Andrew was reassuring. He told her Epstein was a wealthy financier who wanted to help. And why would she doubt him? Andrew had friends in high places, bankers, businessmen, politicians. Epstein was just another name in the list. But that money, just £15,000, became a curse that would follow her for the rest of her life. When the truth came out, she did something few royals ever do. She apologized publicly. She admitted the transaction was a gigantic error in judgment. She said she was deeply regretful, and people admired her for it, at first. For a brief moment, her honesty seemed refreshing. But as the Epstein scandal grew darker, allegations of trafficking, abuse, and power, Sarah's name kept reappearing in the margins. It didn't matter that she had cut ties, that she'd condemned his crimes. In the court of public opinion, once your name is linked, it stays linked forever. Fast forward to the present. ITV executives scrolling through trending topics suddenly see Epstein-Ferguson trending again. Not because of any new revelations, but because of an old clip resurfacing, a 2011 interview where Sarah nervously discusses repaying the money she'd received. The clip goes viral, spliced into TikToks and YouTube shorts with dramatic captions. She knew. The Duchess who took dirty money. It doesn't matter that the clip is over a decade old. Online, time doesn't exist, only outrage. So when ITV bosses met that morning to discuss their future programming, it wasn't just about ratings. It was about risk. They saw the headlines forming before they even happened. One insider reportedly said, "If we keep her on, every time Andrew's name resurfaces, hers will too. It's inevitable. It's radioactive." But behind closed doors, Sarah was facing a very different crisis, one far more personal. Because she had recently learned something that even the tabloids hadn't uncovered yet. Something about Epstein, about Andrew, and about herself. Something that made her wonder whether the connection between them was truly over, or whether someone was keeping it alive on purpose. You see, a few weeks before ITV dropped her, Sarah received a letter. Not an email, a physical letter, typed and signed, mailed to her private residence. It contained only one sentence. "They haven't forgotten." No return address. No context. Just those 3 words. At first, she dismissed it as a cruel prank. But when the Epstein stories began trending again, she couldn't shake the feeling that the letter was a warning. Who were they? Journalists? Investigators? Or perhaps someone closer? Someone who knew how to stir fear in her? And that fear wasn't unfounded. Because whispers were already spreading through London's gossip circles. Epstein's network of contacts was being revisited by U.S. investigators, and certain financial transactions, yes, even small ones, were being reviewed again. Her name, inevitably, was on one of those lists. Now, to be clear, there was no indication of wrongdoing on her part. But public perception doesn't wait for facts. All it takes is one journalist with an agenda, one headline phrase just provocatively enough to light a fire. And once that fire starts, the networks run. Always. Sarah had seen it before with Andrew. His infamous BBC interview, intended to clear his name, became one of the most catastrophic PR moments in royal history. The line about not sweating, the awkward denial, the tone-deaf confidence, it all backfired spectacularly. And when the public turned on him, every person associated with him became collateral damage, Sarah included. So when ITV's board started asking whether her continued presence on daytime television might reignite scrutiny, the answer was clear. It wasn't about her behavior, it was about his. She was paying the price for Andrew's sins all over again. But that's not where the story ends. Because just days after she was dropped, Sarah received another message, this time from a journalist she'd once trusted. It was cryptic but direct. You need to know something. Epstein's files mention you again. Her heart sank. She knew what that meant. Every few years, when new evidence or testimonies surface, names get dragged back into the headlines, whether they're relevant or not. It's the media's way of refreshing old stories, reigniting outrage, and milking clicks. But for Sarah, it was devastating. Could that be why ITV moved so quickly? Had someone tipped them off before the media even went public? One source close to ITV claims the decision was made preemptively. They didn't want to be caught flat-footed if her name appeared in headlines again. That meant Sarah wasn't axed because of what she did, but because of what they feared might happen. It's the cruelest kind of punishment. Being condemned for a crime that hasn't even been committed. As the storm brewed, Sarah began to see connections everywhere. A friend she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly calling just to check in. A former PR advisor offering to help manage messaging. Even an old contact from Buckingham Palace reaching out with carefully chosen words. Best to stay quiet for now, Sarah. Stay quiet. That phrase again. It was the same advice she'd been given years ago during her divorce, during her money troubles, during every public humiliation. And every time, staying quiet only made things worse. Because silence is never interpreted as strength, it's read as guilt. But this time, something inside her snapped. She refused to be erased again. So, late one night, she picked up her phone and made a call. Not to her lawyers, not to ITV, to a journalist. The same one who'd called her after the firing, asking for comment. She was ready to talk. Not on record, not yet, but enough to plant a seed. I didn't do anything wrong, she told them. They're making it sound like I'm part of something I never was. The journalist hesitated. Then why do you think they dropped you? Sarah's voice was steady but sharp. Because someone wants me gone. And they're using Epstein's name to make it happen. The line went quiet. Then the journalist said something that sent chills down her spine. Sarah, I've seen the internal memo from ITV. The decision wasn't just about your past. It mentioned an ongoing risk. Do you know what that means? She didn't, but she would soon. Because a few days later, someone leaked a fragment of that memo online. And hidden within the corporate language, one line stood out like a siren. Potential ongoing exposure due to undisclosed communications between the subject and persons of interest from the Epstein network. Sarah was stunned. She hadn't spoken to anyone remotely connected to Epstein in years. What were they talking about? Then it hit her. Months earlier, she'd received an unexpected email from a former acquaintance of Epstein's, a man she barely remembered meeting at a charity gala over a decade ago. He'd reached out to catch up about mutual philanthropic interests. She never replied, assuming it was harmless. But apparently, the fact that he'd reached out at all had been noted somewhere. Could that one ignored message have been enough to trigger ITV's panic? Or was it a setup? Because as Sarah began to dig, she realized something alarming. That same email had been copied to someone else, a person she trusted implicitly, her own aide. And suddenly, the threads began to connect. The leak to ITV, the perfectly timed resurfacing of old scandals. The internal memo referencing ongoing exposure. What if it wasn't coincidence at all? What if someone close to her had orchestrated the narrative to destroy her from the inside? That thought haunted her. The idea that she'd been betrayed not by the media, not by strangers, but by someone she had welcomed into her inner circle. And if that was true, then this was no longer just about Epstein. This was about betrayal, the kind that cuts deeper than any scandal. That night, she sat at her desk with the lights dimmed, scrolling through old messages, reading between the lines of emails she'd once ignored. She looked for clues, patterns, anything that could reveal who was behind it. Her hand trembled as she scrolled to a name she hadn't wanted to suspect. Her aide, her friend, her confidant. There were inconsistencies. Forwarded emails that shouldn't exist. Attachments missing from her inbox. Metadata showing edits at strange hours. It was subtle, almost invisible, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. And when she confronted her about it the next day, what happened shattered whatever hope of redemption she still had. Because the look on her aide's face didn't show surprise. It showed guilt. And the words that came out of her mouth next changed everything. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Sarah froze. "What do you mean, go this far?" Her aide looked away, tears forming. "They said it was just a background check. I thought it would help you. I didn't know they'd use it to end your contract." "They?" Sarah pressed. But she didn't answer. She just stood up and left, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet room with 1,000 unspoken questions swirling in her head. Who were they? ITV's PR team? Palace advisors? Someone trying to silence her again? And why did her aide, her trusted friend, help them? One thing was certain. The Epstein connection wasn't the reason for her fall. It was the excuse. Someone had dug up her past, twisted it, and handed it to ITV on a silver platter. But who had the power and motive to do it? The answer would take her deeper into betrayal than she'd ever been before. Because what Sarah discovered next wouldn't just expose her aide. It would reveal a secret network of manipulation operating inside her own world. One that didn't just want her off TV. It wanted her silenced for good. And when she realized who was behind it, it wouldn't just terrify her. It would break her. What she was about to uncover would make even the Epstein headlines look tame in comparison. And the betrayal was only beginning. The air inside ITV's headquarters was heavy with tension. The kind of tension that makes people whisper instead of speak. That makes even footsteps sound guilty. Everyone in that building knew something was about to happen, something big. But very few knew that Sarah Ferguson's career was about to be decided by a handful of people sitting behind closed doors, around a polished oak table, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The boardroom showdown. That's what staffers later called it. A meeting so charged, so divisive, that even those who didn't attend felt its ripple through the hallways. The outcome would shape ITV's image for years. And it all began with a single word scribbled across a whiteboard at the front of the room: liability. The head of public relations, a sharp-eyed woman named Helen Ward, tapped her pen against that word. "This isn't about guilt or innocence," she said flatly. "It's about optics. The Epstein connection is trending again. Fergie's quote about repaying him is circulating on TikTok. Every clip gets hundreds of thousands of views. You all know what that means. Silence. The kind of silence that follows bad news no one wants to hear." Finally, one of the senior producers, a man who had worked closely with Sarah for years, spoke up. "We can't just cut her off like that. She's not some random influencer. She's the Duchess of York. She's been loyal, honest. She brings ratings." Helen didn't flinch. Loyalty doesn't protect sponsors, and ratings don't clean reputations. "We've spent millions rebuilding trust after the Philip Schofield scandal. We can't afford another one." The mention of that name made everyone shift uncomfortably. ITV had already faced a bruising PR nightmare months earlier. Executives were still licking their wounds. They couldn't risk another public meltdown tied to a royal scandal, especially not one with Epstein's name in the mix. But the producer wouldn't back down. "She's innocent. The public knows that." Helen's expression hardened. "No, the public thinks she's innocent. Until someone tells them not to." You've been in television long enough to know how fast sympathy turns to outrage. Across the table, a younger executive, a social media strategist with a nervous habit of tapping her phone screen, chimed in. "The engagement numbers are climbing, but not in a good way. There's already a campaign calling for ITV to stop platforming royal privilege. If we keep her, we risk being lumped into that narrative." The timing couldn't be worse. And there it was, the unspoken truth. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about survival. Networks don't bleed, they calculate. Still, not everyone was ready to surrender. The programming director leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "You're talking about ending a partnership with someone who helped revive daytime viewership during a slump. She's good television, warm, self-deprecating, human. You can't manufacture that." You want to replace her with another polished presenter who smiles on cue? That's not what audiences connect to. Helen folded her arms. You're mistaking familiarity for safety. Familiarity only lasts until the next headline. We need distance. Then came the moment that froze the room. The legal counsel, who had been silent until then, opened a folder marked confidential. Inside was a document, several pages thick, labeled Risk Evaluation Report, Ferguson. He slid it across the table. Before you decide, he said quietly, you should see this. I followed that folder. Inside were screenshots, social media comments, trending hashtags, and a list of sponsors who had quietly expressed concerns. One line stood out in bold red font. Asterisk, recommendation, immediate disengagement to prevent reputational escalation. Asterisk. The producer slammed his palm on the table. You're going to destroy her over online chatter? Helen's reply was ice cold. Online chatter becomes tomorrow's headline. And tomorrow's headline becomes next week's boycott. But the real bombshell came next. The legal counsel cleared his throat and added, there's more. We've received communication from an internal source suggesting that Ferguson may be in possession of sensitive correspondence involving a known associate of Epstein. If that information surfaces, our association becomes untenable. That changed everything. Suddenly, every executive in the room was awake. Papers rustled. Phones were unlocked. Whispered questions flew. What correspondence? How credible is the source? Is it verified? The lawyer hesitated before answering. We don't have the full context yet. The source provided limited details, but implied that the emails could raise questions about how much Ferguson knew about Andrew's dealings years ago. A chill spread through the room. Helen leaned forward. Who's the source? The lawyer shook his head. Anonymous. Routed through an encrypted email. But whoever it is, they have access to insider information. Specific dates, contacts, internal ITV scheduling emails. They know things only someone close to her would. A long silence followed. It was the first time anyone in that room realized that this wasn't just about an old scandal. It was about an active leak. And if there was one thing ITV feared more than bad optics, it was a mole. Helen broke the silence. Then we have no choice. We sever ties now, quietly, before this becomes another crisis. The producer spoke again, voice rising. You're punishing her for something she hasn't even done. You're letting an anonymous source dictate her career. Helen didn't blink. That's not punishment. That's preemption. It's what keeps this company alive. And just like that, the decision was made. Sarah Ferguson was out. But the meeting didn't end there. Because just as the executives began gathering their papers, someone else spoke up. A quiet voice from the corner of the room. It was a junior assistant who'd been taking notes. She rarely spoke in meetings, but this time, she couldn't help herself. Excuse me, she said softly. But if that source knows internal ITV information, shouldn't we be asking how they got it? What if this isn't about her, but about us? Everyone froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Helen forced a thin smile. That's above your pay grade, sweetheart. The assistant flushed and lowered her gaze. But the seed had been planted. Because in that instant, even the most seasoned executives felt a twinge of unease. Something about this entire situation didn't feel right. Later that afternoon, the meeting notes were sealed and stored under confidential personnel matters. But what no one knew, not yet, was that someone had secretly recorded the entire conversation. Not on the network system, not on official devices, on a personal phone, hidden under a stack of papers. A recording that captured every word, every calculation, every admission that the firing had nothing to do with wrongdoing, only fear. That recording would soon find its way into the hands of a journalist. And when it did, ITV's carefully constructed facade would begin to crack. But back in the boardroom, as the decision became final, Helen made one last call. Draft the statement, she said. Make it sound mutual, friendly, respectful, the usual corporate euphemisms. But make sure it goes out after her next appearance. We don't want it to look reactionary. The legal counsel nodded, scribbling notes. The producer, defeated, stared out the window. Do you at least plan to tell her face to face? He asked. Helen shook her head. No. HR will handle it by phone. Less emotional that way. And with that, the meeting ended. But what happened next, what none of them expected, was that the audio of this very discussion would soon leak to the press. It began as a whisper An anonymous email sent to a mid-tier entertainment journalist with the subject line, "You might want to hear this." Attached was a 3-minute clip, enough to confirm what Sarah had suspected all along, that her dismissal wasn't about morality. It was about manipulation. The journalist, skeptical but intrigued, hit play. And there it was, Helen's voice, calm and deliberate. "We can't afford to have her associated with Epstein right now. It's not about her, it's about our brand." It was all the proof Sarah would ever need that she'd been sacrificed to protect a corporation's image. And when that clip began to circulate in underground media circles, it would set off a chain reaction that no one could control. Because if ITV could fire a royal to save face, what else were they hiding? That recording wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to leak. It wasn't even supposed to be heard outside the walls of ITV headquarters. But somehow, it found its way into the wrong hands. Or perhaps the right ones. Sarah Ferguson sat alone in her Windsor study, the fire crackling in front of her, the faint hum of the rain against the window. On the table before her was a USB drive in a plain brown envelope. No return address. No note. Just the words scrawled in black ink. "For your ears only." Her fingers trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. A single audio file appeared, untitled. She hesitated, staring at it, sensing that whatever she was about to hear could not be unheard. Then she pressed play. Static. Muffled voices. And then, Helen Ward's unmistakable tone. Calm, authoritative, chillingly detached. "We can't afford to take chances," Helen said. "This is a brand issue, not a moral one. The Duchess brings risk, and risk isn't sustainable. We're cutting ties before this explodes." Sarah froze. Her heart pounded as more voices joined in. Male, female, the shuffle of papers, the scrape of a chair. One voice, faint but familiar, protested. "But she's done nothing wrong. You're punishing her for something she didn't do." Helen again. "Then we'll frame it differently. Call it mutual. Say she's moving on to new projects. We'll thank her, make it sound gracious. But she's finished here." Click. The recording ended abruptly. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she just sat there in silence, her chest tightening. It was real. Every suspicion she'd had was real. She'd been betrayed, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because someone needed a scapegoat. And yet, something didn't add up. How did this recording get to her? Who recorded it? Who risked everything to expose what ITV had done? Her first instinct was gratitude. Someone had defended her. Someone inside that building had believed in her enough to record the truth. But as the minutes passed, that feeling shifted to unease. Because whoever had access to that meeting also had access to ITV's most sensitive discussions. And if they could send this to her, what else could they do? She called her aide immediately, the same one who'd been by her side through every twist of her career. "I need to know where this came from," she said, voice sharp with panic. "Find out who sent it. Now." Her aide's voice on the other end was strangely flat. "Of course, ma'am. I'll look into it." But the next morning, the recording wasn't a secret anymore. Someone had leaked it. Not just to one journalist this time, but to 3. And by noon, fragments of the boardroom conversation were being dissected online, on YouTube channels, gossip blogs, and TikTok commentary clips. The headlines were merciless. ITV exposed. Secret recording proves Duchess was sacrificed for optics. Insiders leaked tape. We fired Sarah to protect the brand. Sarah Ferguson's ITV betrayal. The audio they tried to bury. It was chaos. Within hours, ITV's communications department was scrambling. Helen Ward's team worked overtime, issuing statements denying the authenticity of the clip. The recording has been manipulated, they claimed. Comments were taken out of context. But the damage was already done. The public didn't care about context. They had heard enough. And in an ironic twist of fate, the very network that fired Sarah to avoid scandal was now drowning in it. Reporters camped outside ITV's building. Anonymous employees began whispering to the press. Executives panicked. Emails flew at midnight. And all of them asked the same question. Who recorded that meeting? Because whoever it was had done more than just leak audio. They had detonated a bomb in the heart of one of Britain's most powerful media companies. Meanwhile, Sarah watched from her living room, equal parts horrified and vindicated. She hadn't lifted a finger, yet the truth was unfolding before her eyes. The network that betrayed her was being forced to admit what it had done. But deep down, She knew this wasn't over. Because if someone had been able to record a confidential ITV meeting and send it directly to her, that meant this wasn't just a random act of sympathy. It was deliberate, strategic, and that made it terrifying. Later that night, as she scrolled through the endless stream of social media reactions, something strange caught her eye. A post from an anonymous account that had been tagging her name repeatedly. It read, "Don't thank me yet, Duchess. I only sent what you needed to hear. The rest comes next." No photo, no bio, just that single post. The rest comes next. Her stomach dropped. Was this person helping her or manipulating her? She didn't have time to wonder, because within 24 hours, a longer version of the recording appeared online. Not 3 minutes this time, 15. And this one was worse. In it, Helen Ward could be heard saying something that sent shockwaves through the press. "There's a reason we're doing this now. Certain documents are coming out next month. If the Duchess is still on air when that happens, we're finished. Certain documents." Sarah replayed that line over and over again. What documents? What could possibly be so damaging that ITV had acted preemptively to cut her loose? She called her aide again. "We need to find out what those documents are. I want every name, every leak, every rumor." But this time, the aide didn't answer right away. There was a pause. Then, finally, "I think you should let it go, ma'am. You're already in enough pain." Sarah's tone hardened. "What did you just say?" "Nothing," the aide stammered. "I just meant, it's out of your control now." But Sarah knew that tone. She'd heard it before, the tone of someone who knows more than they're saying. And she couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Because that 15-minute clip hadn't just exposed ITV. It had included a detail only someone in her own household would know: the exact time of her phone call from the network. That wasn't public information. That was personal. Her hands trembled. Whoever had leaked the recording wasn't just inside ITV. They were watching her. Days later, an investigative blogger released a new piece titled "The Fergie Files: Inside ITV's Secret Scandal." The article claimed to have exclusive communications between an ITV employee and a third party close to Ferguson. The messages discussed timing, optics, and containment. One line, allegedly from the third party, read, "She'll find out soon. Make sure she's calm when it happens." Sarah's blood ran cold. It was her aide's writing style. Short sentences, careful phrasing, and the emoji at the end, the same one she used in nearly every text. Heart. Blue heart. Sarah couldn't breathe. Was it possible? Could her own aide, the person who fetched her coffee, guarded her schedule, defended her to the press, have been working with ITV behind her back? She didn't want to believe it. But the signs were undeniable. The missing emails, the strange timing of the leaks, the warnings to let it go, and now, the smoking gun, private information being used to coordinate her downfall. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah printed out every news article, every leaked message, every timestamp she could find. She spread them across her desk like puzzle pieces, trying to make sense of it all. There was a pattern, a rhythm to the timing of the leaks. Each one coincided with a key moment in her ITV negotiations. Every time she got close to securing a new project or endorsement, something surfaced to derail it. And every time, her aide was present. The next morning, she made a decision. She would confront her. When the aide walked into the room, cheerful as always, Sarah didn't waste a second. "How long have you been working with them?" The woman froze. "What are you talking about?" Sarah slammed the printed article onto the table. "Don't play dumb. These messages, these leaks, they all point to you. Tell me the truth. Did you send that recording?" The aide's face drained of color. "I didn't, Sarah. Please, you don't understand." "Then make me understand," Sarah shot back. For a long moment, the aide said nothing. Then, quietly, "They said it was to protect you. That ITV was going to leak things themselves. I thought if we controlled the narrative, you'd be spared the worst of it." Sarah's voice broke. "You sold me out." Tears filled the aide's eyes. "I was trying to help you. But once the first leak happened, they demanded more. They said you'd already been dropped, so what difference did it make?" Sarah stared at her, stunned. "Who's they?" The aide looked down. "ITV and someone else. Someone from your past." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who?" But the aide only whispered, "You already know." And then she walked out, leaving Sarah shaking with rage and confusion. Someone from her past. Someone powerful enough to make ITV act. Someone who knew her weaknesses and how to exploit them. The next morning, a new message arrived at her door. No signature, no address. Inside, a single printed line. You were never the target. For the first time, Sarah realized she wasn't the only one being played. Someone had used her scandal to distract from something else entirely. But what? And who had the power to pull every string? The timing, the leaks, the betrayal, without ever showing their face. She would soon find out. Because the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't about a duchess and a TV contract. It was about something much bigger and far more dangerous. And when she discovered who the real target was, it would shake not just her world, but the royal families. What she uncovered next would change everything, and no one was ready for it. It always starts with trust. That invisible thread you wrap around someone because you believe they'd never cut it. That's what Sarah Ferguson thought she had, a circle of loyalty. But as she would soon learn, every betrayal begins with a trusted face. For days, she couldn't shake those words echoing in her mind. You already know. The aide's trembling voice, the tears, the cryptic warning. It was all too calculated. Sarah replayed the scene in her head over and over, trying to decipher what she had missed. The staff had gone quiet around the house. Normally, her mornings were filled with chatter, the clinking of teacups, the hum of phones ringing. Now, it was silence, cold, stretched silence. Every movement felt watched. Every whisper felt like it carried meaning. And somewhere in that silence, she felt it, the truth waiting to be found. She started with what she knew, the timeline of her downfall. Every leak, every story, every move ITV made. They hadn't come randomly. They had come in waves. Each wave timed perfectly with something she'd done behind closed doors, things only someone close to her could have known. She sat at her desk with a notepad, scribbling connections. Leak 1, the Epstein clip, trending again. Days before, she had spoken on the phone with her aide about reaching out to an old contact at her publishing house. Leak 2, the ITV meeting. 2 days before, she had complained in the kitchen that she was tired of being quiet and planned to do an interview to clear the air. Leak 3, the recording. The day before it leaked, she had asked her aide to cancel her appearance at a charity gala, the one rumored to have a few guests with ties to Epstein's old network. 3 conversations. 3 private moments. 3 leaks. Her aide was always there. Sarah wanted to scream, to confront, to tear through the facade and demand answers. But something told her to wait. If her aide was working with someone, or being watched herself, Sarah needed proof. That night, she asked a tech consultant, a discreet friend she'd trusted for years, to help her. I need you to check something for me, she said over the phone, her voice low. My emails, my Wi-Fi, my phone, everything. I think someone's been listening. He arrived quietly the next morning, posing as a routine IT repairman. While her aide brewed tea in the kitchen, he worked in her study. Within 20 minutes, he found it, a monitoring program installed on her personal laptop. It had been accessing her files, her browser history, even her microphone. Sarah's heart dropped. How long has it been there? He hesitated. Months. Months. The aide had set up that laptop. She was the one who handled its updates, its passwords. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Can you trace where the data's been going? He nodded slowly. It's being mirrored to a private cloud server. But whoever's behind it is careful. They use VPNs and proxy addresses. It'll take time to break through. Sarah thanked him, trying to hide her shaking hands. After he left, she sat alone, staring at the blank screen. Her life, every word, every thought, had been watched. And suddenly, all those carefully timed leaks made sense. She hadn't been betrayed once. She'd been monitored the entire time. She called her aide into the room. Sit down, she said quietly. The woman hesitated. Of course, ma'am. Is something wrong? Sarah didn't answer. She just handed her the printed report from the tech consultant. Why don't you tell me? The aide's eyes flickered down the page, her breathing quickening. I can explain. No, Sarah interrupted, her tone sharp but calm. You're going to try to explain. There's a difference. Tears welled up again, but this time Sarah didn't flinch. She'd seen this performance before. Remorse after exposure, not before. Finally, the aide broke. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. They said it would protect you. That if you cooperated, they'd make sure you weren't dragged into Andrew's mess. They? Sarah pressed. voice shaking with controlled fury. Who are they? The aide hesitated. People from ITV. And someone who said they represented the palace's communications office. Sarah froze. The palace? Yes, the aide whispered. They said the family was worried the Epstein story would resurface and that you might accidentally make things worse. They wanted to manage your image before the media could twist it. Sarah laughed bitterly. Manage my image? They destroyed it. The aide's shoulders sagged. They said it was the only way to protect the monarchy, to keep the focus off Prince Andrew. And there it was, the dagger. Sarah's fury turned to disbelief. So they used me? I was their decoy. The aide didn't answer. She didn't have to. It all made sense now. Every whisper, every headline, every corporate maneuver. Orchestrated not just by ITV's fear, but by royal damage control. Sarah was expendable. Always had been. The realization hit hard. She thought she had been fighting against a network. But she'd been fighting a machine much larger. The same institution that once welcomed her into its gilded halls, only to cast her out when she became inconvenient. And the worst part? They had used someone she trusted to do it. You let them spy on me, Sarah said quietly. I didn't know they'd go that far, the aide whispered. They said they only needed to track scheduling, upcoming interviews, press drafts. I didn't think. You didn't think because they didn't want you to, Sarah snapped. You were their puppet, and you handed them every piece of my life. The aide began sobbing. Please, Sarah, I thought I was helping you. They said it would stop the press from destroying you again. Sarah's voice softened, not from forgiveness, but exhaustion. You can't protect someone by betraying them. You can only destroy them slower. The aide left the room quietly. The door shut behind her with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. For hours, Sarah sat there, motionless. The rain outside had turned into a storm, lightning flashing through the window. She stared at her reflection in the glass, realizing how much she had changed. For years, she had fought to rebuild herself. As a mother, a writer, a public figure who wasn't defined by scandal. And in a single calculated move, they'd taken it all away again. But this time, she wasn't going to disappear quietly. Because if the palace had played a hand in her fall, if ITV had coordinated with them, she had something they didn't. She had the truth. And she still had the recording. That night, she made a decision that would set everything in motion. She called her lawyer, a discreet but fierce man who had handled her most delicate affairs in the past. I want to know everything, she said. Every trace, every document, every digital footprint connecting ITV and the palace. I don't care how deep we have to dig. He warned her it would be risky. If you're right, you're not just taking on a television network. You're taking on the establishment. I've already lost everything, Sarah replied. What more can they take? Over the following week, her legal team worked quietly, tracing the origins of the leaks. What they found stunned even them. Several of the IP addresses tied to her compromised laptop led not to ITV, but to a consultancy group frequently contracted by Royal Communications. The same firm known for media stabilization, the polite term for controlled press manipulation. There were emails between mid-tier ITV staff and a palace-linked intermediary discussing containment measures regarding Duchess Ferguson's public image. One line stood out. Objective: redirect scrutiny from Prince Andrew by preemptively framing F as an overexposed media liability. Sarah's jaw clenched as she read it. It was confirmation, in black and white, that her career had been sacrificed to deflect attention from Andrew's ongoing disgrace. The betrayal was complete. She wasn't a casualty of scandal. She was the shield. And now, they had left her to burn alone. That realization didn't break her, it hardened her. She began recording her own video diary, documenting everything. Every email, every call, every whispered threat. If they think they can silence me again, she said into the camera, they don't remember who I am. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with resolve. Still, part of her knew this fight would come at a cost. Because once she started pulling at these threads, she'd be threatening not just ITV's reputation, but royal secrets buried for decades. And she wasn't the only one being watched anymore. Her lawyer warned her one evening. We've detected unusual activity on your phone, foreign pings, hidden network traces. Someone knows you're investigating. Sarah nodded grimly. Let them watch. I have nothing left to hide. But the watcher, whoever they were, wasn't just observing. They were preparing. Because the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. And soon, a new twist would emerge, one that would drag her even deeper into the royal labyrinth she thought she'd escaped long ago. A package would arrive at her doorstep, sealed and anonymous. Inside it, a photo, not of her, of Prince Andrew, standing beside someone he shouldn't have been with. And in the background, almost out of focus, a shadow that looked hauntingly familiar. A shadow that would force Sarah to face a terrifying possibility, that her betrayal wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning, and what came next would turn her fight for redemption into a battle for survival.